Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us to discuss the Variable Operations and Maintenance Cost Review Draft Tariff Language. My name is Isabella Nicosia, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'll be facilitating the web conference today. I'm also joined on the line by Sydney Mannheim, our Assistant General Counsel, as well as Kevin Head from Market Analysis and Forecasting, and then Brad Malauskas. The draft tariff language for this call is available on the Variable Operations and Maintenance Cost Review Initiative webpage on the California ISO website. Today's call is being recorded. The recording is for informational and convenience purposes only, and any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. We will be taking questions throughout the call today, and you can enter the question queue at any time by pressing #2 on your telephone keypad. I'd just like to remind everyone to please introduce yourself before asking your question. So with that, I will hand it over to Sydney Mannheim, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Isabella. Good morning, everyone. This is Sydney Mannheim, and as Isabella noted, Brad Malauskas is on the call. He is an attorney with Davis Wright Tremaine, and he is working with me on this tariff initiative, and may be responding to some of the questions you folks may have. This is our first call and comment opportunity for the draft tariff language on the Variable Operations and Maintenance Initiative. We will be going through the comments that have been submitted, the written comments that have been submitted, and any questions that arise on the call. There will be another opportunity to review a second draft of tariff language in the first quarter. We will not be asking stakeholders to comment over the holidays. And the filing would be in the late Q1 timeframe. So with that, I guess first I'd like to thank SoCal Edison for submitting comments, that they had no comments. It's nice to know that they've reviewed the material, so we appreciate that. And then we'll move on to comments that we've received from our own Department of Market Monitoring. And though perhaps before I do that, I'll see if there are any preliminary or process questions before we get into the more substantive discussion.
So do we have any questions in the queue?
Doesn't look like we have any questions, but just as a reminder, you can press #2 on your telephone keypad to place yourself into the verbal question queue, or you can simply send a message to all panelists in the WebEx chat.
Okay. So the first comment DMM has, and you can see it on the WebEx that is posted, it concerns or it suggests that we delete a phrase, resources with the same fuel source or technology. I think DMM makes a good point that we are not just maintaining the existing categories of fuels and technologies. We are expanding them so there isn't a one-to-one correspondence. So we will want to make some tariff change to address that fact. It might not be the specific suggestion that DMM makes, but yes, we will definitely address that to make sure it's not confusing or misleading. And then moving on to the next point, and then we'll open it up for comments after we get through the DMM's questions. So the next point concerns the general use of business days rather than calendar days. And the CAISO as a whole very much agrees that when it comes to business processes, the use of calendar days can be problematic, especially with weekends, 3-day weekends, long holidays, making it very challenging to meet calendar day deadlines. Many of our, if not all of our business processes use business days, so we are definitely migrating towards the use of business days for our business processes. DMM is suggesting that in all cases, calendar days be moved to business day And what we are planning to do in response to that comment is actually to review each reference in the draft tariff language to see if it should be moved to business day. We do not think in all circumstances that it needs to be moved to business day. And in some cases, we may change the language to say, use the phrase within 3 business days. Say we could use business days, but we would be perhaps allowing ourselves to do things faster than the outside deadline. Normally, we can get effective values into our market system without necessarily waiting for 3 business days to pass. So I think there's some compromise language to provide some additional flexibility and additional time to manage holidays and weekends, but not necessarily, delay effective dates of, say, a bid adder that gets negotiated, because normally I think we're doing it on a faster basis, and market participants, I would think, would want those updated values to be ideally reflected sooner or later. So in our next version of the tariff language, we will reflect any additional proposed changes. DMM is our partner in this effort, so they will be involved in that review before that's posted. And if DMM has any specific comments on that, because they sort of got into the next comment. So that, the next comment reflects that concern about the effective date of a negotiated value. It suggests it should be 3 days following the resolution date, and I think we're going to suggest something like within 3 days, so that if we can do it faster, that can happen as well. So with that, those are our responses to DMM's questions and comments. And before we move on to Vistra, I would want to open it up to DMM to respond, or any other person on the phone, or Kevin, or anybody else to comment or augment what I have explained.
Looks like we do have one question over the phone lines. Your line's been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Sydney. This is Amelia Blanky with DMM. I just wanted to say thank you for considering making these changes, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Amelia. Okay. So I think we can move on to any other comments before we move on to Vistra.
No further questions. Thank you.
I know Kevin's going to help me out here a little bit. As folks can tell, we posted 2 different pieces of tariff language. One that would apply during the interim period where the current tariff would still be in effect while we are in parallel working with all of our market participants to develop these new values that would not be in our market systems until the effective date of the companion tariff language. And we did push out the dates. And Kevin, let me ask you to just explain how that transpired and how that would work.
Sure. Yeah, I can talk that through. Good morning, everyone. This is Kevin Head. I'm a market engineering specialist here at the ISO. I'll ask Isabella just to switch over to that timeline that we had sent Yes, this is great. So we wanted to make sure that we were intentional about how we could implement these new default values and complete any negotiations related to these new principles that we're providing in a way that works to achieve the goals of getting people's values updated in a timely manner, while also making sure that we were not placed in an operational situation that we couldn't achieve our tariff timelines. And what I mean by that latter statement is that we have this 15-day timeline by which we have to respond to a request for a major maintenance adder application. So if we get a major maintenance adder application, we have to respond within 15, what is now calendar days, and what we're looking to change to be business days. And we wanted to make sure that under the new framework, when we're negotiating these O&M adders, that during that transition period, we're not still subject to that 15-day period in the situation that we get, a number of negotiations all submitted at one time. So we introduced this phased approach to handle the applications. And we explained it partly in the final proposal and earlier versions of the paper, but did make one tweak after the final proposal was made and before this draft tariff language was submitted. And that was in response to a request from one of our stakeholders to move the implementation date of the new default values back to January 2022. So in response to that, we just shifted the final two dates backwards by 3 months or into the future by 3 months. So this timeline is a visual representation of our plan to implement these new values. And I'll talk it through, but there's a couple of key dates. So the new default values that we're proposing in this initiative will go live on January 1st, 2022, assuming this tariff language is accepted by FERC. And we expect that most market participants will want to have any negotiated values done by that date, so that when we shift over to those new default values, any negotiated values that would accompany them would be completed at that time. So for our first phase of negotiations, we plan on opening that application window up on May 1st and giving folks at least a month to submit their application such that we would commit or do our best effort to complete those negotiations by October 1st. So, the idea is that we're trying to incent folks to submit their applications early. If they submit the applications after May 31st, we can't commit to complete those applications and negotiations before the new default values go into place. So that's what the phase 2 negotiations are meant to be. We're also proposing, starting on May 1st, the beginning of the period of phase 1 applications, to suspend that 15-day timeline that I had mentioned earlier. And that is so that if we get a number of applications, we're not subject to completing those in 15 days. We plan on reimposing that 15-day deadline on April 1st of 2022, by which time we expect to have all of those phase 2 negotiations done. So the constraints that we're working with here is we don't want to be placed operationally in a situation where we get a lot of, legitimate applications all at once and have to process them really quickly. But we also want to make sure that folks who submit their applications in a timely manner can reasonably expect to have those negotiated values completed and in place by the time that the new default values go into place on January 1st of 2022. So that's in general what the timeline was. And Vistra's comment in the stakeholder language was, or in the tariff language was, hey, what changed between the final proposal and this tariff language? So that's kind of the shift, was just that 3-month shift from the date that the new default values will go into place, which was previously messaged in the final proposal as October 1st and is now planned to be on January 1st, 2022. Thanks. That's kind of a long-winded way of explaining this, but if folks have any questions or concerns, you can take those now.
Looks like we do have one question over the phone lines. All right, your line's been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. Can you hear me?
Hi, Kathleen. Yep.
Okay, great. I love the way you recapped my comment in the stakeholder comments. That is exactly what the intent was. I think I used a few more words, but I'm pleased you got the message. I wanted to follow up just for a second when you talked a little bit about the drawn timelines and thinking about fall 2021. I understand, and also caveat, that I understand that the Azure Storage Dev project is a different project, so I'm not necessarily asking for information on that project. I just want to provide some context for what I'm personally struggling through when I'm thinking about the implementation of even this effort specific to non-generating resources. If mitigation were to be approved and applied beginning fall 2021 for NGRs, we'd have to go through the whole process of setting up those mitigated prices going into the fall release. And I had been looking at your timeline, kind of mapping it against that, going, okay, any kind of negotiated O&Ms would have to be done, even if you didn't change any of the policies on what that was and just straight up used what you had in your draft final proposal, would need to start being done. And what would that timeline look like? Should it be done in at the same milestone? So I was interpreting that the application for the negotiated O&M, assuming as Azure goes forward and mitigation is applied, would be 5-1 even for an NGR. And then between 5-1 and 10-1, those negotiations would occur. And if negotiated O&M adder or negotiated energy O&M adder, according to your policy, is successfully negotiated, it would get registered in master file, largely based on the current processes. Is that assumption just completely out of left field, or is that kind of what you were intending, but there's a change in that as well?
Yeah, I think I understand your question here is I haven't been following the dates of the Azure Forest Storage Dev and related mitigation questions in a detailed manner, but assuming it's on October 1st is when that would be under the kind of current framework that we have. And our expectation is between, say, May 1st, 2021 and when these new default values go into place, that we will still have to process normal major maintenance adder applications and negotiated VOM adder values under the current framework. And we expect that we'll be processing those as kind of, keeping that normal process that we have going until now, like from now until the new values go into place. This is meant to be kind of a side-by-side, like parallel operations type thing to go alongside that so that we're ready when the new default values go into place. So if an NGR resource scheduling coordinator wanted to come and negotiate a variable operations and maintenance adder for their resource ahead of time, I think we would be willing to have that discussion and negotiation. And then when the new default values go into place and we have these new principles that are clarified, kind of effective, then we would be negotiating under that new framework starting on January 1st. So does that answer your question? There's meant to be an ongoing process that we have currently will stay until it's superseded by this new process, but we just want to make sure that we're ready on day one with any negotiations under that new framework.
I think that helps. A follow-up question I have is, so for this parallel process under the current, under your current process, it would still be subject to the 15-day deadlines that are currently used?
We are requesting that 15-day timeline is suspended for all applications and asking that stakeholders take our good faith effort to try to complete any negotiations under the current framework in a timely manner, but just that we don't have a 15-day tariff described timeline for those. We've, made a lot of efforts to make sure this process is completed in a timely manner, and it's in our interest as well to keep these negotiations processed quickly. And so this is kind of, a request for some trust from our stakeholders on this front.
Understood, and I completely understand. If it's all right, I want to just make a follow-up comment and a suggestion to the CAISO. As you work through both this effort and the ESDR 4, and again, I understand there are different efforts, and this may not be the full set of people to have a deeper conversation. So I think Mr. ask is just if you could take the two projects back and kind of look at it from an effectiveness perspective and coordinate the implementation, I think that would be really helpful. And I'll just give an example for why and why I think it's relevant in this context, just to make this request, is that a part of that project, if approved, includes the negotiations of variable operations and maintenance costs. And that negotiation, those principles seem to that they would effectively integrate into your paper, your proposal, and your language and the tariff. And so I'm in my mind integrating them and integrating what I think the tariff language would look like. And I think I would just make the same request for the CAISO to kind of take the two of them and look at them together, assuming that then the negotiations, even under that new policy, would almost be a third process. If this makes any sense, right? You've laid out, okay, two, you have a parallel. Well, that one's going to introduce a third one that the negotiation team, the team that does these negotiations, is going to process. And we just want to make sure everyone's ready, right? And that we're prepared with what we need to do. And if you need I would assume you would need this similar kind of on time to ramp up negotiations for that go live in fall 2021, that third process that you've laid out here. So that's part of why I just mentally kind of think of the 5.1 as even the application to negotiate under that project. Since I'm reading into it, that's the time that your team would need. So I just want to provide that context and feedback and just make that request. And I appreciate you hearing our perspective.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for that comment. And we will, we've been working alongside the policy folks on this, and continue to do so, but we'll take another look at it, both of them side by side, and make sure that we're all aligned on that front. And, message any changes resulting from that, if any, on the next round of this or when discussing the storage deb and mitigation proposals for non-generating resources. So thank you. It's a good comment. Appreciate it.
This is Sydney. If I just might comment that sometimes linking different initiatives makes sense conceptually, but they may end up on a different timeline. In fact, we have target timelines, but things happen quite differently. So I just want to put a note of caution as to whether these can be linked. But I will leave it to the policy folks to look into that. But the main purpose of what we're doing here is to implement put into tariff language what the board approved for the variable operations and maintenance initiative.
Yeah, thanks, Sydney.
By the way, hi, Kathleen. How are you doing? Nice to hear your voice. So, Kathleen, your next question does seem to, or the first two questions seem to go to these issues. Are there any other, have we responded fully to your comments on items 1 and 2?
Hi, Sydney, and yes, it's great to hear your voice too. Yes, you have, and I really appreciate the thoroughness of Kevin walking through that and just talking through this with me. And I also appreciate your caution. This stuff is complicated, especially when there's a couple, similar content being worked on at the same time. So,
yes, I know
your patience and your willingness is helpful. Yes, but
okay.
fully responded to for both of the first two. Thank you so much.
Okay. So, and then number 6, this comment about clarifying startup and shutdown includes cycling time. We feel that this is a subject better discussed in an initiative that's more focused on battery technology and not in this initiative. And maybe Kevin will also ask you to respond more fully to that.
Yeah. I'll just add a couple of comments to say it seems, on the topic of commitment costs, which would be kind of what we're referring to, saying that these costs are variable with respect to startup or shutdowns or run hours, that my understanding that non-generating resources don't have commitment costs. So if, I wouldn't expect that we would have O&M adders that would be included in run hours or startup costs for non-generating resources, because those values wouldn't be used anywhere. And then another expectation would be that, if you're cycling a non-generating resource, excuse me, that would be a change in the electricity output of that non-generating resource, and so, arguably could be covered. That arguably would cover cycling of the non-generating resource. So, I agree with Sydney's statement to say, this is something that we can maybe figure out further down the road. But I think the current language that we have likely already covers the situation of cycling for a non-generating storage resource.
Yeah, thanks, Sydney and Kevin. I appreciate the clarification for NGR, and I largely agree with you. I'd say both of the clarifications that we kind of threw out could be BPM clarifications, an example, rather than in the tariffs themselves. I would actually throw you a different curveball. Storage resources, yes, generally NGR, but you also have storage-backed proxy demand resources that are eligible for commitment cost bids. So when we think about like the suite of storage participation models, I just think the clarification somewhere might be warranted. Just noting that they can have startup bids, and that there's a possibility that those negotiations could be requested.
Sure. Yeah, and thanks. That's a good point. And I should also, as a larger caveat, to say a lot of this stuff is new ground for us. So we would likely start with negotiating resource-specific adders, and then with the experience of having done those, take that and consider trying to identify trends there and larger themes that emerge. And then we would then integrate those into our BPMs and or tariff language, which is consistent with what we've done for other, technology types. We had proposed major maintenance adders for generating resources back in 2012 or whenever. And at that time, we didn't have enough experience with the negotiations to start to clarify these principles and propose default values. So I think this is just another evolution in that process, applying it to storage and PDR and other types of technologies. So I don't want to commit to including it in the BPMs at this point before we've done any of these negotiations, because I think we're planning on learning a lot, and some of it is just resource specific anyways. But yes, thank you for the question and the suggestion.
Hey, let's keep the this up still on the WebEx, because there's another comment there that I will respond to. The tariff language posted does add some detail into section 30.4, detail on that's currently in section 39, because we do use a lot of the same inputs into default energy bids, which is section 39 includes a lot of information on default energy bids, and the commitment cost section is in 30.4, which historically has not had a lot of details in there, although we've added details over the time in response to numerous commitment cost enhancements that we've implemented over the years. And now we've trying to add some of the detail that's in section 39 that also applies to section 30.4 in section 30.4, in addition to keeping the detail in section 39. I'd like to explain why the tariff is the way it is, and why we think we should make these changes. And I will ask Brad, who is the architect of the current proposal, for what is shown on our website. So initially, our proposal was to have all of the all of these details in the BPM for the cost-based values that would be input into cost-based bid adders, fuel cost, gas price index, transportation, all of that. And then in our tariff filing, various tariff filings we made to implement our nodal market, did not have that detail in either Section 39 or 30.4. In different orders, in one order regarding the detail in 30.4, the FERC accepted our tariff language without asking us to augment that tariff language with additional detail. With respect to Section 39, FERC ordered us to add that deal on compliance. So that's why the tariff ended up the way it ended up, and we've always thought it was problematic that we had all this detail. We added cross-references in Section 30.4, but we are, now that we're in these sections making some additional changes, we thought it was time to put enough detail in Section 30.4 so you wouldn't have to, flip back and forth to Section 39. There's no one right way to do any of this, but that is why we took this step at this point, because other folks have noticed that absence of detail in Section 30.4. Brad, is there anything else you'd like to add on or explain about your approach for re-engineering those sections?
Thanks, Sydney. And hi, everyone. This is Brad Malauskas. Just to add, your explanation is entirely right, Sydney. I just would want to add that the thinking behind putting these provisions on renegotiation of the variable O&M adder values and informational filings in 30.4 instead of keeping them in 39.7, it's sort of to have keep all the same tariff provisions in the same part of the tariff, namely 30.4.5, sort of one-stop shopping so you don't have to flip back and forth. And I know the comment was that it may have been confusing, but that our intent was actually the opposite, to make it a little easier for readers who were in the section on variable O&M adders to find most or all of the relevant provisions they need right there without having to know that they also need to look at Section 39.7 for additional information. That's all I would add.
Thanks, Brad and Sydney. I have a follow-up question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at this Section 39, the negotiated values and informational filing section, I'm understanding your logic now. I just had a follow-up on, so the negotiated opportunity cost adders language is still in the Section 39, but it points back to the Section 30 negotiations for the OCs, for the opportunity cost adders. So you don't propose like a tariff cleanup to completely separate the sections here. And so I think I was just wondering if that's the principle, is that also what you would like to see happen?
This involves a judgment call about how much rearranging of the tariff we should be doing in a case that's in a tariff filing that's primarily for the purpose of implementing a policy initiative. So I think we want to focus on the areas that we're working on. We do periodically make miscellaneous tariff filings to make non-substantive changes or correct errors or fill gaps. But I don't really want to weigh this filing down with a lot of changes that are sort of unrelated to the scope and the subject matter of what we're doing. that's my initial reaction to that. It could be something that we would do in a different filing.
I know that's helpful, and I'll just share with you the perspective that I'm coming from is that the way that I use the tariff, right? And so just kind of from an end user's perspective, I understand the logic and kind of what your intent is and don't necessarily, and I think that having the text in section 30 on that rationale makes sense. From an end user's perspective, I know to go to this section 39 section today for all of the negotiated values and informational filing, which has an exhaustive list.
Yeah, yes. It's like moving stuff in the grocery store. Once you know what aisle something's in, it can be quite daunting to see that it's moved. So we'll take that in and No, thank you. I was just going to say there's a way to, at least in this section, maybe point to the other section 30 so that it's not lost, and so that if someone who's using it is used to using it this way wouldn't miss that additional information, that would be really helpful, or at least consider that. Well, let us take that back and consider that comment, and that is a comment that we hear whenever there's some reorganization, and yeah, I know it's a little traumatic. But I'm not going to commit to what we're going to do at this point. So any other comments on this 6, on issue 6, before we move on?
Looks like we have one over the line. Your line's been unmuted. Please go ahead.
And actually, I think that's I feel like you've fully responded to our comments in number 6. So thank you so much to the CAISO and to Brad. And I would note that just for the expediency, that the last comment was just reiterating what we just discussed about the reorganization, I think in either 8 or 9. So I just want to thank the CAISO for your consideration of our comments and your very thorough feedback on this. Thank you so much.
So thanks, Kathleen. So that would bring us to the end of the submitted questions and comments. And we would be opening it up to any other questions or comments on the phone as a final offer.
Still no questions over the line.
So Isabella, turning it back to you.
Thanks, Sydney. Yeah, so if there are no further questions, we can conclude today's stakeholder call. So thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks.